activating data in media today. So what we're all interested in, I believe. If I could have your attention. I'm not going to leave till I get your attention. Who cares? I do want to mention a couple of MediaPost things. We have coming up another show in this vein called the Brand Insider Summit CPG. It's happening at Lake Tahoe in the beautiful Sierra Nevada, I think they are. Is that what it is? Mountains of California. It's a 3 or 4 day getaway. You might qualify to be a VIP possibly if you're a CPG brand. And also we would like to call attention to you suppliers and vendors. There are sponsorship opportunities still available. It's a great, very involving conference that where people get to know each other, have fun together, and great content like we're having here today. So keep that in mind. And we have data, which is also, of course, as they say, in the wheelhouse of all those people here. The Data and Programmatic Insider Summit is following in Tahoe. So take your choice and be sure to stay with MediaPost wherever we go. So now, without further ado, I'm going to have Dan Aversano come up here. He's the SVP of Ad Innovation and Programmatic Sales for Warner Media, our premier sponsor. Dan?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the first upfront event I've been to where there's no booze, so I guess that's good, right? So we're going to talk about a few different things today, but I'm going to try to keep this somewhat simple. I caught some of the previous comments on the panel, and obviously data is something that I think is probably near and dear to everybody's organization at this point. For us, it's really about activating that data and what you can do with that data. I think as an industry, the media industry, the marketing industry, we spend a lot of time talking about it. From our perspective, though, there's still quite a few challenges in actually making things actionable. And again, finding the keys to actually use that data in a meaningful way to drive your business. So we're going to try and go through some of that today. I'm going to try to keep it very simple. Hopefully we have some time for some questions after that. I'm also not going to make this really salesy. I'll use some of our stuff as examples, but please, everything that I'm going to go through today, it is not specific necessarily to Warner Media. We actually think these best practices can be utilized across really any media company, digital players, linear players, and everything in between. So first, I just want to address, and I don't know if this is clicking, there we go. We are now Warner Media, so just a second on this. Formerly Turner, just so you know who we are. We are now obviously part of AT&T. We have now pulled all of our assets together into a broader group known as Warner Media. And that's really, to be honest, it's us recognizing all of the change that we see in the industry today, right? So AT&T acquired all of these great entertainment assets and content assets, really with the idea that you take all that great content and all of the great data and put it together. And that's, again, in response to where we see the world going. And again, that's a perfect setup for what we're going to talk about today. So probably the most obvious thing that I'll say, but the industry has changed. And it's changing for a lot of reasons. And that pace of change is insane, right? I remember like 3-4 years ago feeling like things were changing so quickly. You know, the speed of change today, it is 10 times faster than it was yesterday. And next year it's going to be 10 times faster. And some of the big things that we see, so in terms of consumers, there is an amazing amount of competition for consumers' time as it relates to entertainment and media consumption. And a lot of that's being driven by technology. Right? So if you think about the way that people consume technology, the different platforms, right, there's more content available on more platforms than ever before. And that's creating massive fragmentation for consumers. So that means as marketers, right, and everybody, again, somewhat obvious, but everybody knows this, you used to be able to buy Friends on NBC on Thursday night and talk to 25 million people in 30 seconds. It was easy. It was one phone call. It was one buy. It was really expensive, but you were able to do it. Somewhat simple. You can't do that today. Right? That content now exists in 8,000 places. There are probably still 25 million people watching Friends today, just across 48 different touch points. Everything from Netflix to syndication and live TV to in VOD to maybe on a Watch TBS app on a smartphone to a Warner Brothers app to a streaming service that we're actually going to launch our own now later this year. Right? So again, that technology is really driving all this fragmentation, and it's making it really, really hard to connect with consumers in a very consistent and simple way. all of this is also, I think, obviously creating massive challenges, obviously, in terms of how you guys are able to drive results for your business. And that's at the heart of this, right? We always talk about sort of that John Wanamaker quote, I know half my marketing doesn't work, I just don't know which half. That is still true today, which is crazy. And I would argue that it's even harder to address today because of all of this, right? So we see this massive focus on outcomes, right? And some of it is also driven by the rise of procurement within organizations, right? You all manage your business, you have budgets, and you have financials that you have to be held accountable to. We'll talk more about that as we go, but what all this means is the way that we look at it, the way that you have to buy media has changed and is going to continue to change pretty aggressively. And at the end of the day, it's really about value. Value is at the center of all of this, right? It's about driving more efficiency. It's about driving actual results to your business. That's what all of us are challenged to do. You want to connect with consumers to make them think, say, or do something about your brand. You want to drive people into your restaurant. You want them to fall in love with your brand so that not only do they show up tomorrow for breakfast or for lunch, that 6 weeks from now, they had a great experience and they're back, right? So this is where we see the world going. But again, it's really, really hard. This is what I think we're all doing in response to that, right? We're all collecting massive amounts of data, trying to understand that consumer, chase that consumer, follow that consumer, right? I'm sure you all have massive CRM initiatives. Everybody's trying to build an identity graph. We work with data management platforms, right? You have all of the major agencies now buying identity solutions, whether that's Merkle, whether that's Epsilon, whether that's Axiom. Agencies are literally now recognizing the value of this, and they want to be part of that ecosystem, right? So the agencies have data, you have data, we have data, right? I'll talk more about that. But the key to all of this, right? Data's not a problem. We have a shitload of data. The question is, what do you do with that data to actually drive your business in an effective and efficient way to drive value to your bottom line? And that's what we're going to talk about. For us, it is really about activating data. And we think there are some really smart ways that you can do that across both linear media, digital media, and we're going to get into that. I'm actually going to show a quick video that starts to set the stage in terms of what I'm talking about when I say activating data, and hopefully starts to lay out some of the things you can do. Now again, the video is specific to what we do at Warner Media, but I assure you, everything that we're going to go through, again, in our opinion, it applies to every media company or every media partner that you have. So with that, I think I just click.
Sci-fi geeks, retail therapists, face serum aficionados, chocoholics, gearheads, helicopter parents, dog lovers, beachgoers, binge watchers, best friends, and superfans. Quit only buying demos like 18 to 49. With so many different types of viewers on so many platforms, there's a smarter way to connect with your consumers. And we've got it.
Coming at you. Okay. Coming quick. Okay.
Embrace a smarter way. Move past traditional media buys with the most powerful targeting tools in the business. An industry leader in this technology, we've been investing in audience buying since the beginning, and the growth is real. We've created advanced solutions that enable you to more precisely connect with consumers you care about most. 2 game changers that leverage precision, allow you to reach your audience and drive outcomes.
Time to turn that frown upside down!
We can use virtually any data set, whether it's your first-party data, best-in-class third-party data sets. And now we can also use AT&T's vast data from over 170 million direct-to-consumer relationships, including set-top box, geolocation, mobile web, and mobile app data. All the ingredients are essential. With powerful data like this, we can not only help you reach your customers in TV, but also on VOD, OTT, desktop, and mobile. True cross-platform audience buying.
This is how it's done.
And when we put the right ads in front of the right people, it drives the business results you care about most for your brand. Looking to drive awareness? We've got you. How about driving website visits? We can do that too. And what about driving sales? Yep, we can also help you do that as well. The results are undeniable. And as AT&T, we're supercharging our efforts around attribution and ROI, delivering faster results, more actionable insights, and the ability to guarantee outcomes. This is the smarter way to connect with your consumers, and Warner Media is leading you there. With her and him and her, that guy, this guy, her and her too, her and her, that guy, him.
So I'm sure you've all seen videos like that before from other media companies. But what's really important is I actually want to break this down now and explain how we do that. So yes, of course, that is a scissor reel, but I assure you, and I'm going to take you through in pretty good detail right now, those are things that we can actually do now. I feel like for the last 3 to 5 years, there's been a lot of conversation and talk about this, a lot of testing, a lot of trials, but I do feel like we're now at a point where we've cleared a lot of the runway, and again, we can actually do these things. So how do we do it? 3 big sort of steps that we see in terms of activating data. So the first is we need to be able to match and model data, behavioral data, with media consumption data, right? So that could be your own CRM data, that could be information that you know about your customers, it could be third-party data from companies like Nielsen Buyer Insights, or there's Crossix data for pharma, there's auto data, there's tons of data that's out there, right? But the key is you have to be able to take that data and then integrate it. So match it, model it to media consumption. Right? In the digital space, it's typically matched, right? So it's usually a direct match to either other first-party digital consumption data or cookie data. In the media, in the television space, it's really at times matched to set-top box data, but it's a lot more modeling where we actually need to link that behavioral data to some level of TV consumption data. That's really, really important. The second step around forecasting, right? So now we've taken the data and we're able to identify what these people have been consuming from a media standpoint, whether that's digital, whether that's linear consumption. The second part, and this is really important on the linear side, is around forecasting. In order to activate your data for TV today, right, TV is a futures market by and large, right? So linear television is bought and sold today based on what we think is going to happen tomorrow, right? We're sitting on the eve of an upfront where there will be, I don't know, $40 to $60 billion transacted for the next year. We're selling that now. Right? So we need a point of view. We need to understand how many people are going to be watching Big Bang Theory on TBS 3 months from now, 6 months from now. Right? So you need to be able to forecast that. That's been one of the biggest challenges in this space historically. So in activating your data and using all that great data that you're collecting to use that in television, this forecasting piece has been tricky. I'm going to explain how that's been solved for. And again, not just by us. Every major media company now has some level of a solve out there for that. That was a big stumbling block a few years ago, but it has largely been solved. And then the third piece is around optimization, right? And this is where the rubber hits the road. This is how now we've connected your audience, we have forecast that audience, so we can actually find these people across all of the media touch points. Now the key is you need to build a media plan. You need to be able to choose where you're going to put your ads based on what you want out of that, right? So we mentioned this idea of outcomes earlier. That's actually really, really important. And I think somebody mentioned a deal that we did with Chipotle. We functionally can now, with the data that we've matched with the forecast that we build, we can actually start to build media plans that are optimized against driving a core KPI, not just eyeballs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's really important. So again, let's break this down a little bit more. Data used to be the challenge, right? So it used to be that it was actually really hard to take data and connect it to viewership data. That is not a problem anymore. That exists in every which way you can imagine, right? Whether it's integrating behavioral data with set-top box data from third parties like Comscore and Nielsen. There are slews of advanced data sets, right? That old MRI that everybody probably has heard about in one way, shape, or form. MRI Fusion has existed now for years, so you can look at all of that data. And more importantly, both Nielsen and Comscore do lots of first-party matching and modeling into their viewership data sets. Media companies are also doing that as well, right? So NBC can do it with their Comcast data. We can do it with our AT&T set-top box data. So the data piece, again, we feel it's largely solved. The biggest trend that we see here is first-party data. Where we see the most growth in our deals today in the advanced advertising space is the use of first-party data coming directly from an agency or an advertiser. And again, I think we've built, as an industry, some pretty solid tools that enable that. So the data piece, again, we think largely solved for. The forecasting piece, right? So again, we now know what people have been watching. How do we find out what they're going to watch? Well, we built a mousetrap. We call it CAE. It's competitive audience estimation. But again, every network has some level of a solve for this. And there's even some third-party tools out there that do this. Nielsen actually recently released a new audience forecasting tool that's available for anyone to buy, right? Where you can take custom audiences and they'll produce forecasts for that. So the way that we do it, we actually use lots of historical information. We use scheduling information, and our model actually then builds a forecast at the 30-minute exact day, right? So we know how many early morning breakfast couponers are going to be watching CNN tomorrow at 5:30, and we have a forecast for that. And it's different at 6 o'clock and 6:30, and it's different next week at 6:30. So it's a very granular forecast. That's really, really important. And again, we're not the only ones who can do that. Lots of other media companies can. So you can not only do it with us, you can do it with other partners as well, which again is very important. The reason why the half-hour forecasting is really important is particularly in live television, we use a lot of averaging, right? A lot of people talk about, well, I do planning or I analyze at the program level. Okay, so Friends, right? It's a program that runs on TBS. There's lots of telecasts of Friends that run on TBS. It's in syndication. We run it all the time. So typically today, somebody at the agency, media planning side, or even at the client would say, oh, Friends last quarter delivered, I can't read the number, 200,000 impressions against foodies, right? And we would say that's what Friends delivered. Well, in reality, there's not one telecast of Friends in that quarter. There's more like 200-300. And when you actually look at each individual telecast, it actually looks more like this. So now you're going to make a decision based on just that average line, 200,000. I will promise you this. No single telecast is going to deliver 200,000, right? That's actually going to be the needle in the haystack. Majority of them, more or less, right? And again, we average it. So averaging it, we think, is actually really dangerous when you're trying to activate your data, right? We think it's important to be very, very precise. When you do that, right, now you can actually start to optimize at this level, right? So jumping to that second step, we've matched the data, right? We've found your audience. We've built a forecast to find that audience. Now we can start to actually build a schedule where you're going to get more of the things you want and less of the ones you don't. That's really important for the linear side of this equation. Now, cross-platform is really important. It is not just obviously about live linear television. More and more of our consumption is now coming from additional modalities, whether that's mobile, whether that's VOD, whether that's OTT apps. That is where our growth is coming. Live linear ratings are going down. That's a big headline. I'm sure you've never heard that before, but it's true. They're going down. But consumption is actually going up. It's just happening again across more modalities. So for us, it's actually really important. We made the pivot last year where all of our audience deals now, one of the biggest asks that we put on the table of the agency is you can't just buy this on TV. We want you to also map that segment across our digital footprint so that a portion of the impressions, it could be 10, 15% of those impressions, we're running in OTT and VOD. Like for like, TV premium content, but consumed in other modalities. That's really important when you're thinking about activating your data. We need to stop thinking about it silo by silo by silo and having separate strategies for different platforms, right? We think TV is TV. And we want to activate data across our entire distribution footprint, whether that's on a mobile phone, whether that's on a 55-inch TV coming off a cable box, OTT, you get the point. Really important. Not only is digital a key component of that, social more and more is for us. Now, a lot of folks don't think about WarnerMedia and our brands as necessarily a big player in social media. We're actually a huge player in social media. We've built an entire business around distributing brand messages through our footprint in social, through our handles, from our talent, from our programming, which have massive followings across Facebook and huge consumption on YouTube and Instagram. Not only can we distribute messages through our voice in social media platforms, and again, we can map data in there as well, we also have new opportunities like social commerce, right? So a big offering that we started to push out now is not only can you map your data in, activate in linear and digital, we can push that. We could also push that in to the big social platforms, use it for targeting, but then offer new and exciting commerce opportunities where you can drop a coupon, right? You can actually start to collect data. You can have somebody fill out some information, right? So that's a way that we're starting to combine the data side of this with what we think are new and more interesting ad formats that are also tailored to new platforms. So at the end of the day, where the rubber hits the road in this for us is attribution. We think that when we use data in a really smart way across all of our distribution footprint, it drives real results. And a big part of how we're doing that is with AT&T data now. So now being part of AT&T, we have about 170 million touch points. We have north of 130 million mobile devices. We have over 25 million set-top boxes. Right? And we also have broadband, right? We provide broadband to about 14, 15 million homes. So we're now collecting a lot of first-party data. And the key for this is the mobile data. That mobility data, there's things like geolocation. So we know where people are going. and we can actually start to use that data to make better, smarter marketing decisions, right? We can use it to measure campaigns and then to feed into optimizations. It's a big part of what we're doing. It's really important that we can do this with our data. Lots of third parties do this. I'm sure you've all heard of companies like Ninth Decimal and Place IQ. I think they have great solutions. The challenge that we've historically had with third parties, it's really slow. It's hard to do this. It takes months to do these studies. It's also really expensive. These studies can range from $50,000 to $120,000 to measure a single campaign. That doesn't scale for us, right? 3 years ago, we sort of drew a line in the sand and said, we want to measure attribution on every campaign. I want to measure attribution on over 30,000 campaigns every year. At $100,000, I can't do that. Now with our own data, we can start to do that. And that's really, really important because, again, when you're activating your data, what we see is real results. You saw some in the video, but this is actually for the category. We actually saw a 56% increase in ROAS when using targeting and activating that data in a smart way. And the good news is we see massive momentum, right? And I think it's all drafting off of the attribution results that we can show. But we've been in this space now for really before 2014. We first started building some of these solutions back in 2012, 13, and first hit market in 14. But we've now executed over 400 campaigns this way. And it works every time. So the good news is we're starting to see momentum, but what I would say I would sort of leave you with before we take some questions is it's still not fast enough, right? It's still 5-10% of most people's thought process and budget in terms of how to really activate that data with partners today. It needs to be more. This problem is going to get harder and harder and harder, right? So I think we see good momentum and we see people trying some really exciting things. I think Chipotle was a great example of literally starting to restructure how we do a media deal around outcomes, around what matters most. We need to do more of that. So hopefully that was simple. Hopefully it was brief enough, but I think we have some time for questions if anybody has.
I know you didn't bring this up, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the impact of 5G on all of this in the future. Because you've got AT&T, Verizon, both rolling out 1,000 miles an hour, both for cellular and for home. How do you see this evolving over time?
Yep. So it's a great question. 4 years ago, I remember sitting around with our product teams, and we were really worried about 5G. We didn't have a horse in that race, and it was going to change everything, and we didn't know what we were going to do about it. Now we're like, 5G is going to be great. So 5G, right? So 5G is the next generation wireless networks that obviously AT&T is pushing to lead in, as well as Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile. Cellular networks move usually in around decade periods, right? So we're kind of just now on the tail end of LTE 4G, and now you have 5G coming up. It's going to take some time to come to fruition, but the easiest way to think about it is what 5G is going to do, it's going to take a pipe that's about this big today and make it that big. 5G will start to bring broadband type speed to every device, not just mobile devices. So all of a sudden, if you think about megabits per second down and upload speeds, right? I remember everybody used to have it was 25 megabits per second was like a good Wi-Fi speed in your house. Right now in my house, I probably have a full gig up and down. Now, that is great in my house, but I don't have that on my phone, right? When you go to stream something on an app and all of a sudden you see buffering, that stinks, right? 5G changes that. So the first big change that we see is immobility. Content consumption on mobile phones is going to go through the roof, through the absolute roof, right? That's the first big change. The other big change is we actually think the way that people think about connecting in their home is going to drastically change. So today you have Wi-Fi in your house. In a 5G world, I would argue you're not going to need that because now your television can actually have a 5G chip and you can be getting 5G service not from an operator and a fiber line going into your house, but over the air. Now, that's going to change the way that people consume content, and it's also going to change the way that devices can connect to each other, right? Things like autonomous vehicles, right? They need massive networks to exchange information. 5G is going to start to do that. And I would say the last piece, and this is somewhat selfish for us, is data. There's going to be a lot of data moving across 5G. And as somebody who can now say that we own roughly 40% of that market, and hopefully more when 5G rolls out, the amount of data that we're going to be able to see and use on behalf of our partners, we see growing exponentially. Good question, though.
Anyone else here for Dan? Well, we have him, all right. And Dan, you have a team, a solid group of your team members here today, correct?
Yes,
yeah.
Raise your hands, guys.
Raise your hand if you're with the team. Oh, here we go, right here. We'll meet you guys. All right, well, if you have more questions for Dan, you're going to be sticking around for a little bit?
I'll be around for a little bit, yeah.
Okay, Dan's around. You got the team here up front. Please give a big round of applause for Dan. Thank you so much for lunch and for the great presentation. We're going to take about 15 minutes just to kind of reset the room a little bit, and then we'll bring up Keith from Duncan Brands to continue the content. Thanks. We'll be right back.
claws, no wings, no venom. Maybe I should just quit and go back to making noise.
Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That is why it is called the present.
Simply the most beautiful spot I've ever seen in my life.